Oh, hello there, boys and girls. I was just about to read a bedtime story. Perhaps you'd like to listen to it as well. Okay then. Once upon a time, there was a kid. For as long as he could remember, the kid had dreamed of working as a transfer driver. Every day he would pretend he was sat behind the wheel of a Renault Traffic, answering questions about current snow conditions. Sometimes he would even dare to imagine that he was one of the elite, driving a Volkswagen Caravelle. At night, his dreams would take him to those winding mountain roads he longed for, and when he woke to find it had all been a dream, he would sigh sadly to himself. But the years went by, and the yearning in the kid's heart grew. First, he got his driving licence. Then, he attended the required courses to allow him to work for a transfer company in the Alps. And so it was that one cold, grey day, at the start of December, the kid found himself at Gatwick Airport, waving goodbye to his parents as he embarked on his great adventure. When the plane landed at Geneva Airport, the kid was met by another driver, who took him to Morzine. The kid was in awe. Some boys might imagine themselves in armour, fighting side by side with King Arthur, or wielding a lightsaber, fighting for the rebels with Luke Skywalker. So it was that the kid had dreamed of the day he would don the transfer driver armour, a company-branded fleece, and mount his own metallic steed, his own four-wheeled X-Wing, and here he was, in the midst of his very own heroic tale. All the way to Morzine he stared, open-mouthed, out of the window at the roads, those roads that he had dreamed of driving on. He had made it. The next day could not come soon enough. It was his first day on the job. The kid got up early. The kid put on his smartest trousers. The kid had a shave. The kid ate a nutritious breakfast and made himself a packed lunch. For the kid knew, after all, that a good transfer driver was a prepared transfer driver. The sun was shining as the kid left the house, and he held his head high as he walked to work. He had left the Seasonaire chalet a boy, but he knew he would return a man who drove transfers. He arrived at the office full of joy. Outside, he saw a group of his fellow drivers, resplendent in their Seasonaire fleeces. They appeared to be sharing a cigarette. The kid did not consider smoking to be appropriate behaviour for a driver, as fleece has a habit of picking up smoky aromas. The cigarette did not smell like English cigarettes, however, so maybe, the kid thought to himself, it was some kind of healthy French cigarette. "Hello, chaps," the kid said. "I'm here to drive vans." He had expected a friendly greeting, but instead was met with a sullen silence. Eventually, one of the drivers stepped forward. The kid was dismayed to see that it did not appear that he had shaved that day, and his trousers did not look as though they had been ironed. He sneered insolently at the kid. Well, well, looky what we got here." He put his hands on his hips and looked the kid up and down. "Think you've got what it takes to be a driver, eh?" And without waiting for a reply, he turned and spat on the ground. "Better run along then, kid. The boss is waiting." This was far from the kid's idea of a transfer driver as a noble knight of the road, and he headed to the office door, feeling slightly sad and confused. As he got to the door, he saw another driver who he hadn't noticed before, leaning against the wall. The man was older than the rest of them, with flecks of grey in his hair, like snowflakes in the night on the drive back from the airport. He had a look of faraway wisdom in his eyes, as though he had seen all sorts of conditions and all the diversions in his time on the roads, and knew all too well the many shortcuts. Yes, the kid thought to himself, here is one I could follow. Here is one I could call king. Don't worry about those guys, kid," he said softly. "They think because they've seen a bit of black ice on the road from Tannage, they know it all." And the kid's spirits lifted. The other drivers watched this exchange, and their leader called over, "Look at that, the old timer's got himself a new friend," and the others laughed. "Don't you pay them no mind, kid," the old timer said. "Come on, let's go inside." The rest of the day was a blur to the kid as he received his fleece and signed his contract. The boss, who was younger than the old-timer and looked as though he spent too much time behind a desk and not enough time behind the wheel of a Renault Traffic, told him that his driving in the snow training would take place in 2 days' time, and with that, the kid headed home. As he walked home, he noticed the sun had gone and grey clouds had replaced it. A storm was coming. The next morning, it was snowing heavily. The kid went for a walk around town, saying to himself, "Wow, it really is a winter wonderland." He headed to Carrefour to stock up on food. When he got to the checkout, he said to the lady working there, "Hello, I'll be driving vans this winter." But she didn't seem to understand. The kid opened up his jacket and pointed to the company logo on his fleece. "Drivez les vans," he said in his best French accent, but it was hopeless, so he headed home. The snow kept falling through the day, and the kid settled in to do some online driving theory exams just to keep fresh. He believed that he was set for the night, but it was not to be. As the sun was setting, his phone rang. It was the office. "Kid, we need you. Because of the storm, all the flights have backed up, and we need extra drivers." But boss, I haven't done my driving in the snow training." "It wouldn't be safe." There was a pause, and then he heard the words that filled his heart with the courage he knew he would need. "Kid, the clients need you." "I'm on my way, boss." And with that, he rushed towards the office, slipping and sliding in the snow as he went. Meanwhile, in the office, as the boss hung up the telephone, a group of drivers crowded round his desk. "No way," their leader said. "We're not driving with the kid." The others murmured their agreement. "He's not fit to drive. He's still wet behind the ears." The old-timer pushed his way through the crowd. "Oh, look, it's the kid's best friend. Back off, old-timer." The others laughed. The old-timer's bones ached. He felt weary, but he knew what he had to say. "I tell you, the kid is a good man. His heart is pure and his license is clean, and there is nothing he cannot do within the speed limit and not exceeding maximum daily driving hours." The other drivers looked at one another, and some of them looked ashamed. The leader of the drivers' gang looked angry. He clenched his jaw and stormed out of the office, with his minions following behind. As a parting shot, he shouted over his shoulder, "You keep him the hell away from me. He's your responsibility." The old-timer heard their van start up as they headed to the airport. He waited for the kid to arrive. He could hear the wind howling outside. The roads would be lonely and treacherous tonight. Suddenly, he heard the kid enter. He looked scared, as well he might. He picked up his schedule and looked it over, barely registering the names of the passengers, a family of 5 from Macclesfield. The old-timer put a hand on the kid's shoulder. "You got this, kid." "I'm scared," the kid replied, his voice barely louder than a whisper. "Why do we put ourselves through this?" The old-timer smiled. "Fortune and glory, kid. Fortune and glory." The kid smiled in return. "Go ahead, kid," the old-timer told him. "I'll be right behind you." And with the old-timer's words ringing in his ears, the kid left the office, jumped in his van, and began his first transfer. The old-timer sighed and picked up his own schedule. He pulled his fleece close around himself as he got in the van and started the engine. But disaster! The engine wouldn't start. He started to feel a growing sense of unease. He cast an expert eye over the engine and noticed immediately that the spark plugs were missing, or something. I can't drive, so I don't know specifics. The old-timer sat with his head in his hands. It was hopeless. The kid was out there, alone on the road, with the wolves circling, wolves in transfer vans of their own. But then, the old-timer had an idea. It was madness. It could never work, but it was the only hope he had, even if it was just a fool's hope. He had to try. Meanwhile, the kid made his way to Geneva. He told himself, this is not a dress rehearsal. The road was quiet, but he did not feel alone. He felt the spirits of all the drivers who had come before him, out there on the road that night, stretching back over the years to the days when skis were straight and snowboards just a rumour out to the west. They guided him on his way with the help of the sat-nav. Full of his newfound confidence, he met his passengers and loaded their luggage with Tetris skills a 5-year veteran would be proud of. As the van left the airport, he suddenly felt a chill of premonition. It was still a long drive back to Morzine, and anything could happen out there. Anything. You can handle whatever lies ahead, he heard the old-timer's voice in his head. Remember, you are a driver of Morzine. And he found the courage to continue. Things were going well. The kid had made small talk with the passengers till they had fallen asleep. Now all he had to do was deliver them safely to their chalet. However, as he left Tallinge and began the climb to Leger, unbeknownst to him, a group of 5 vans had begun to follow, a pack of predators closing in. As the road climbed ever upwards into the mountains, so the kid's confidence grew. I was born to do this, he muttered to himself. But as he checked his rearview mirror, he felt a cold stab of fear. He could see the lights of a van, full beam and closing fast. The vans closed in around him. He could see his tormentors from the office leering at him out of the windows as they tried to force him off the road. The kid could see the drop down to the river as the vans closed in. All hope was lost as he shut his eyes and waited for the end. The inevitable lurch as he fell into the abyss. He heard a crash, but he was still going. He opened his eyes, and then he looked back. One of the vans had crashed and was a fiery wreck. How could this be? And then he saw. No, it was impossible. Yet there it was. A team of horses pulling a transfer van behind them. And who was holding the reins? There he stood on the roof of the van, the old-timer, holding the reins in one hand. Muscles like the steel cables of the Prodan Express when Morzine was still young. In his other hand he held aloft a whip, which he alternately used to keep the horses at full speed and to beat away the vans that assaulted the kid. The kid looked about in amazement. His foes were in disarray. One by one the old-timer picked them off. Time and time again the whip cracked and the vans crashed till there was but one left. The leader of the wolf pack kept going. The kid used all his skill to keep keep pushing the van to its limits. The snow kept falling and he could barely see a thing. There was ice on the roads and he was driving at the absolute limit of his abilities. But still the other van was ever there with him, pushing him harder and harder. The only sounds were the engines roaring, the wind howling, and the whip cracking as the old-timer struggled to save the kid from the abyss. Every once in a while the kid would hear the old-timer crowd, "Hya! Hya!" as he strained to force every last bit of speed from the weary horses. As Leger approached, the old-timer knew that there was only one thing that he could do. He knew what it would cost him, but he had to do it. "You're going to get yourself killed, chasing after your damned fortune and glory," he muttered to himself, speeding the horses onwards, and then he did it. One last crack of the whip, and he aimed his van at the one van left attacking the kid. He hit it side on. It hit the barrier and spun out. The kid looked back in amazement. He pulled over to the side of the road. The old-timer pulled over behind him. The kid stepped out of his van, and the old-timer did likewise. As the kid walked towards him, he saw the old-timer lose his balance, stumble, and lean against the van. He looked old. "Are you okay?" the kid asked. The old-timer smiled, a sad and tired kind of smile. "I guess this is the end of the road for me." Understanding dawned on the kid's face. "No!" he cried out. "You don't mean it!" But the old-timer just smiled. He walked over to the kid and wiped the tears from his face. "I know now why you drive, but it is something I can never do." With that, the old-timer leaned against the barrier. He felt tired so tired. Then, with a huge effort, he raised himself over the barrier. He climbed over it and walked down to the river. With tears blurring his vision, the kid watched. The old-timer lowered himself into the river. As he sank below the surface, he raised his arm in a final thumbs up before sinking into the depths. The kid watched the surface of the water. Then he heard a noise behind him. The slumbering guests were stirring. He knew what he had to do to honour the memory of the old-timer. He climbed back into the van and began the final descent to Morzine, the final descent home. The clients gave the kid a €20 tip that day and a 5-star review on TripAdvisor. In the weeks that followed, he spent many happy days on proles and many Wednesdays at happy hours, but he never forgot the night when the old-timer rode to glory and made the ultimate sacrifice, and when the kid rose from the darkness and into the light. The kid returned home after that winter, and his tale is only remembered now in legend, but sometimes, at night, when the roads are empty and the north wind howls, sometimes drivers still hear the voice of the old-timer in the wind.
Fortune and glory, kid. Fortune and glory.